Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation with my friend Jess O'Brien. This week we continue our discussion on Bagua Master Ma Gui. We talk about the characteristics of his particular style of Bagua. Then we talk about lineages versus the reality of the relationships and training. And finally, we discuss Ma Gui's unique aspects of his training with Dong Hai Chuan and Yin Fu. Then we move to talking about a lesser-known student of Yin Fu, Li Yong Qing, a.k.a. Iron Arm Li, who was Liu Hung Chieh's main Yin Fu Bagua teacher. And this week in our Patreon, we wrap up our discussion on the spiraling energy body. We discuss external dissolving and moving into the 8 bodies. The 8 bodies will be the next series that we cover in the Patreon. So this is sort of a introduction into that as well as a wrap up on the spiraling energy body. So check it out. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening and take care.
According to Ma Gui style teacher Li Baohua, the Baguazhang passed on by Ma Gui emphasized the lower basin walking, so his lower legs were extremely thick. Lower basin walking means that the strength of the whole body is concentrated on the lower legs and feet, using the hidden strength of the bone and tendons. Ma Gui's lower legs were so developed that the shin bone was completely protected by tissue. He would occasionally allow people to hit them with wooden or iron poles. Ma Gui would often wear a sand-filled jacket on his body or a sand-filled belt around his waist for strength training, and would attach ropes to nearby trees to make a netting and then train under the netting. The netting would ensure that he stayed low. It also said he would demonstrate his strength by Bagua circle walking underneath a 3-foot-high table. But it also notes that, this wasn't his normal training. Most of the time, he just walked and built up his leg tendons through countless hours of slow, concentrated circle walking in a horse stance that dramatically transforms the large tendon lines from the neck to feet and strengthens the entire body. But in terms of the legs, it talks about lower basin walking where you squat while you walk and get real low. Mm-hmm. And, me personally, I don't have the strongest knees as being a Westerner or whatever. So I tend to walk in a higher posture or middle posture. But that low posture, only when I feel like my legs are super relaxed and I'm feeling at my best. I've found myself walking in a lower posture sort of naturally over the years, not forcing myself, but when I feel my quad and legs are feeling when they're feeling loose and I've been doing a bunch, I find myself sinking a little bit lower into my stance and getting more grounded.
All techniques can be done sort of at a high, middle, and low stance. So generally when you're training for a more martial thing, you do the low and the middle one, and when you want to do things for health and whatever, you do the upper and the middle, because different things are being engaged, and you have a different kind of movement, right? Like when you're doing really low stuff, you're solid, you're much more solid, but you're not able to move as quickly. Where if you're in an upper mid-range, you're able to move easier, but you're not as solid. And so some of that is body type too. I mean, I think Ma Gui was maybe 5'3", 5'4". I mean, he wasn't.
Yeah, it sounded like he was a short, stout type of guy.
Well, I've only seen one picture that's supposedly him, and he's pretty much the shortest guy in the picture. And the other people aren't that tall either. So, I think, he wasn't a big guy. Neither was Liu Hung Chieh for what it's worth. But, I think that was part of this, appeal of something like Baguazhang to a little guy like that, was that you could still do it and, really get some power and be a badass even without being a big guy.
Right. The mobility can be to your advantage. So it says here on the wiki, Ma Gui was most famous for his devastating fighting technique, a wrist strike with a straightened arm. Now I'm thinking that might be that crab technique, with sort of a bent, like a crab's bent arm, kind of I don't know. It says, according to third generation Yin style master He Poren, in order to practice his wrist striking, he would do a push-up style exercise that involved him falling forward onto the floor, onto the backs of his wrists, and then springing back up to a standing position, which he would practice repeatedly and could do with ease. He had bested many famous masters by using only his wrist striking. And you couldn't touch his body. If you did, you felt like you were being electrocuted. So there you go. So maybe, because you think of a crab, like when they bring the food in, especially, they have that curved wrist kind of. So that and a wrist strike can be badass if you hit it the right moment.
Well, and there's all that coiling motion in Bagua, so it lends itself again to that kind of.
There's movement. A lot of coiling. In Rosho, where you push down on someone's arm, you could wrist strike up into their face real easy if you sort of like flip off their arm.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of techniques where you're using that sort of back of your palm, wrist, little bit of your forearm to smack people. And I think that's one of the characteristics of Yin Fu's style of Bagua is it has a lot of, like the other guy, Iron Arm Lee, his nickname is Iron Arm.
Right. There you go.
Like, the part of it is to develop this really strong, really intense kind of power and
harsh power, with your arm
strikes.
It also says that to further strengthen his technique, Ma was known to practice with 10-pound iron rings on each wrist.
Again, that's just going to reinforce that ability to smash things with your palm and your wrist.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's a nice thing to have. Ma Gui had a reputation for being an extremely conservative teacher who demanded the very best of his students. He did not teach professionally, and he was therefore able to maintain extremely high standards in training. Fiercely dedicated to the traditional way he had been taught Bagua, he refused to modify his teachings to make them easier, and felt that anyone who thinks the skill is too difficult to learn should not be taught in the first place. So there's some Bagua people all Chinese martial arts people are known for having extremely high standards and incredibly harsh attitude towards training.
Well, and that's what I was saying earlier is that, if you don't need the money, there's no real reason to professionally teach martial arts.
Right.
Because if you can teach it for fun and do it as a hobby and pass it on to a few people who may really have have done the preparatory work to be able to take what you've got and maybe even take it to the next level. It's a big investment. And I don't know. I mean, if I didn't, if I had a successful lumber business, I don't think I would teach martial arts. I'd probably just do it on the side for fun,
Right.
Especially if, you're getting older and you're, in your 60s and your 70s, when people start really getting interested in what you're doing, you may not by that time really have a whole lot of interest in teaching a bunch of youngsters the basics, and
right.
So I think
that'd be a drag at that point.
Right. And so I think he was selective about who he taught. And, the only person we have any real connection with is Liu Hung Chieh, so I'll take him. And, by the time Ma Gui was like, okay, I'll teach you some stuff. Leo had been doing Bagua for probably 40 years, So it's like, it wasn't, just
now I'll teach you something.
Right. It wasn't some newbie, coming in through the door. And I think that's, similar to Deng Haichuan.
Yeah, that's a Bagua thing.
He was kind of like, I'm here. I'm not here to coddle you and to take you, to teach you how to move. I'm here to, if you want to, if you have the ability to receive what I'm putting out and you want to do the work, I'll do it. But if not, and I think that's where that's just kind of a different mentality than we're sort of used to in the modern age. Because I don't know of anybody who's like, I do this for fun and I have 1,000 students.
Right.
You do it for fun, you might have 1 or 2 people, 5 maybe. But if you're doing it, like if you're going to spread a martial art into the world, you've got to put it out there as a business, and that's a whole different game than just practicing, getting good, and teaching a couple people.
Right. Ma Gui continued to train extremely hard well into his golden years, and for sparring was said to favor the triple chuanjiang, spearing palm, another famous technique that Ma Gui perfected. When Ma Gui was in his 80s, he would still train the triple Chuanzhang. Ma Gui's body looked very light, as if his feet did not even touch the ground. So that sounds like it's when you just spear 3 times in a row with the Bagua, what we call drilling. Calling it spearing here, but Chuanzhang, that's drilling.
Sure.
Those are nice. That's a face strike where you just advance relentlessly, stabbing them in the face. I like that. I wanted to pull a little something from Ma Gui's system of Baguazhang from the teachings of Liu Hung Chieh website, maguibagua.ca. It says here that the Magua lineage is not simply Yin Fu style, though. Ma Gui, although he did learn from Yin Fu, also learned directly from the founder Dong Aichuan. Ma Gui started to learn with Dong Aichuan when he was younger, and later on, Dong Aichuan lived with Ma Gui. Ma Gui was called Yin Fu student because he was the younger generation and because his father was good friends with Yin Fu. This kind of generational switching is common in the martial arts. Teachers, uncles, and brothers are often a hodgepodge of relationships. And I thought that was interesting because as we've been exploring all these different masters during this second season of our podcast, like we're seeing that type of crisscrossing relationships where guys might have officially been a student of someone, but then they learn from someone else, but they're the same age as other people, so they're kept in that group. Like there's different ways to interpret your position in the chart, kind of.
Yeah, well, there's no like official, record, and
right.
Everybody makes their own chart.
Right. Everyone has their own official record. And your official teacher is the person you bow to and you get written down on their chart and you're part of their family. But maybe later in life, you train with other people who are even more influential. So you have that connection as well. And a lineage chart oftentimes will have like it says here, it's a hodgepodge of relationships.
I mean, I can think of at least 10 people right now off the top of my head who teach Kumar's stuff and never mention him once on their entire bio website, anything. But
right.
what they're teaching is his Wu style, his energy gates, his Baguazhang. And, they just don't like him anymore, so they don't mention him on their websites. But, that happened back then, too. Like,
of course.
You have a falling out with your teacher, you're just going to delete their name from your website, but they're still your teacher. That doesn't change.
You don't get to escape that easily.
Yeah, you can't trust
part of Chinese martial arts.
Well, and you have to, that's why part of what we do is we look at multiple sources because, one, nobody in martial arts ever says I learned from a nobody and he kind of sucked. No one says that. And no one says, my lineage is a bunch of guys who barely practiced. Right.
Right.
So it's always my teacher is the best of his generation and he learned from the best of their generation. That's just how it goes.
That's just how it goes.
And so what you're really looking at is, that's why they say, the proof isn't what the teacher does, it's what his students do. Because if you can't teach it, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to die on the vine, and part of what makes a good teacher is you actually pass it on. You don't just beat up your students and look cool. And so I think that, lineages are at best a suggestion, it's like of what happened, because
there's a lot between the lines of the lineages.
Yeah,
pretty much. So another thing it says here, Ma Gui was a favorite of Dong Aichuan since he was literate, talented, and had a good character and trained very hard.
Of course, he's his favorite, right? Like they don't say, oh,
always has a favorite.
Couldn't stand the guy,
Right. There are 2 ways that Ma Gui was special among Dong Aichuan students. Ma Gui started with Dong Aichuan when he was 12, so he did not have the basics of other styles. He was the only one that got the lowest level basic training from Dong. All the others were skilled in other styles when they started. Secondly, Ma Gui was not interested in other martial arts, unlike some of Dong's other students who liked to fight and compare styles. He liked to fight like the others, but not to learn any other styles. Perhaps because of this, he was one of the first generation apprentices who learned the most complete Bagua system. That's pretty good stuff.
Yeah,
but it did sound like he started as a kid. He's Dong Aichuan's youngest student, is what he's known as.
I think that's the essential piece there is that he started with Bagua and stuck with Bagua.
Mm-hmm. And he was the last one to come along because he lived till 1940. Like very few of Dong Aichuan's students lasted that long.
Yeah.
Next, we wanted to look at another great Bagua master who's very little known in the Bagua world, but we found his name in the Power of Internal Martial Arts as part of Liu Hung Chieh's lineage. As a matter of fact, a pretty big part of his lineage. And he's a student of Yin Fu, one of the greatest Bagua masters. And Yin Fu had a number of students. But the student known as Li Yong Qing, Iron Arms Li, who we've mentioned a few times along the way, was one of Yin Fu's most important students. And he was Liu Hung Chieh's, Grandmaster Liu Hung Chieh's primary Yin Fu style teacher. But he's been very difficult to find much about. Isaac, we haven't found life and death dates for Li Yong Qing, have we?
No, we have not. As far as
there's not much in English about Master Li. So
we can assume he's roughly the same age or a little younger than Ma Gui, basically.
As far as Li Yong Qing's life and death dates, I think you're right that he's probably consistent with Ma Gui and the other students of Yin Fu. So maybe born in the late 1800s or probably born in the mid to late 1800s and then surviving into the early or mid 20th century. But he's clearly Ma Gui lives to 1940. I don't think Li Yong Qing makes it that far. So somewhere during the war with Japan era, I can only imagine, he must have passed away at that point. But that's all speculation. It was just such a war-torn time period that lots of people were dying, probably, tens of millions. So he may have been among them. And the first thing I wanted to put out was from the Yin Fu master He Jinbao, who teaches in Beijing. We got a quote from one of his websites that said, "Many disciples of Yin Fu became famous practitioners in their own right. Foremost among them was Ma Gui. He was followed by, in order of achievement, Li Yong Qing, then Men Bao Zhen and Gong Baotian." So there's our mention of Li Yong Qing. He's said to be second only to Ma Gui in terms of Bagua expertise. That's a pretty high compliment.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was widely known as one of the top guys, but he just didn't really leave much of a record.
Mm-hmm. But it sounds like he was a badass if he was in second place to Ma Gui. Another thing we found was from an old interview with s2ep28 from 1999. Xie stated that his own teacher, Men Bao Zhen, was considered to be the third best pupil of Yin Fu. He was third, Ma Gui was number one, and the guy in second place was Wan Tong Li, otherwise known as Li Yong Qing.
Wang Tong is just...
that's the name of his jewelry store, I guess.
Yeah, he had a jewelry store.
So Li is known as Li Yong Qing, and at other times, Li Wan Tong, as well as Iron Arms Li is another of his nicknames. So from Bagua Journal, we found from Bagua Journal in 1993, there's a small section on Li Yong Qing. It says Li Yong Qing owned the Wan Tong jewelry store in Beijing, unless people called him Wan Tong Li. Li was known for very strong arms, and so people also called him Iron Arm Li. On one occasion, when practicing with Yin Fu, Li pressed Yin Fu's wrist with great strength. When Yin turned his palm over suddenly, Li was thrown onto the ground 3 meters away. Yin Fu was known for his ability to stick to an opponent's force, borrow that force, and easily redirect the opponent. Li Yong Qing also eventually developed this skill to a high level. So just examining that briefly, you stick to the opponent's force, you borrow that force, and then redirect the opponent to slam them down. That sounds typical of any Chinese martial arts going to try to do that probably, but it's easier said than done to stick to someone's force. So it sounds like he's just letting you push towards him and he's bouncing that to send you away somehow.
I mean, so borrowing is where you take the other person's force and use that instead of your own, right? So you're not pushing against them with your own strength. You're just kind of they're sort of falling into it.
I think of it as an example, like if I push down on your arm, you respond by pushing back up. So I ride that up energy and whap you in the face, maybe with a wrist strike from below. Like, does that make sense? Is this is what we're talking about, borrowing the energy?
The first level of it is essentially like a Tai Chi thing where you're just yielding. The second level of it is you're able to sort of make contact with the person and follow them. The third level is you're able to stick to them and very slightly direct what they're doing and move them in a direction. So that's the sticking, right? So you have the sticking, which is where you connect to the person, and then borrowing is your pulling them in, right? And that will move them off balance. That's more like a Tai Chi technique, for example, that you're using a softer kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
But that's also just a smaller person type of technique, right? That if the person's
yielding somehow,
if the person's using a lot of strength, well, it's not yielding. See, that's the thing. It's there's a difference between sticking and borrowing and yielding. Yielding is physically coming into yourself. I don't think that's what he was doing. I think he was doing the thing where you sort of touch the person, you kind of attach yourself to them, and if they move forward, your whole body moves back. It's not your hand coming towards your body. And so you're more like absorbing them or redirecting them.
So you're sticking to what they're doing rather than collapsing under it.
You're sticking to it and taking it away from them, not sticking to it and moving back from it. Like you're not collapsing into yourself or letting them push you. It still has a element of going into them, even though you're moving away from them. So the sticking part is where your mind is still going into their body, even if you're going backwards.
So next, it looks like Yin Fu and Li Yong Qing. Li Yong Qing was kind of an employee of Yin Fu's in his bodyguard and caravan work. It says here, Yin Fu was hired by the government to work as a tax officer. Li Yong Qing worked along with him. Once when Li Yong Qing went to a temple fair, he witnessed a hoodlum taking liberties with a young woman. When he tried to stop the attack, the hoodlum wouldn't listen and turned on Li to fight. Li blocked the assailant's attack, moved in close, and caught him with an elbow to the head. The hoodlum died as a result. Li escaped going to prison only after an influential eunuch who was close to Yin Fu intervened. Whew, narrow escape, thanks to the eunuchs of the palace. It's interesting because when you talk about Yin Fu, the eunuchs keep popping up in the stories. It's clear that those guys held a lot of power and money and authority inside the palace somehow.
Yeah, that was a period of time when they were they hadn't quite gotten the stigma of being bad guys yet. So they were, well, because eventually eunuchs got kind of this reputation as being
right, like, corrupt. Yeah.
Corrupt. And I think at this time there was still a thing where they were,
well, he got him off on a murder charge.
I was going to say,
that does sound a little corrupt.
Pretty corrupt.
He did kill the guy with the elbow to the head.
Yeah. So there was a few were in
some money changing hands.
But I think that's also just like, it's like the modern day equivalent of like knowing a state senator or something.
Right. Oh, hell yeah. All that stuff helps. So the story continues here. Although Li Yong Qing was known to be close to the Yin family of Baguazhang in Beijing and known to be one of Yin Fu's top 3 disciples, he did not teach many students, and thus he is not well known outside of the Yin family of practitioners. While it is said that Ma Gui and Li Yong Qing had better technical skill than Men Baozhen, Men was the inner door student who inherited Yin's complete system. So that's a whole nother side of the Yin Fu family. But again, the story here being Ma Gui and Li Yong Qing, were the top 2 students of Yin Fu. And so he gets to keep that with his name forevermore. Pretty much most of what we know about the guy, like all we know is there was a list of top students. Li Yong Qing was one of them. And he taught Liu Hung Chieh his Yin Fu Bagua.
Yeah, that's all.
That's all we know.
That's as much as was ever relevant for me.
I think in the Bagua that we train, you can see some elements of it that look like Yin Fu. There's some straight palms in there and swinging arms that look like they could come from Yin Fu style. But other than that, it's hard to interpret.
There are a couple pieces of it that are very much deliberate, but they're sort of hidden within the Chen Tinghua form.
That's how I'd see it. And
there is a set, I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but there used to be a set of Leo doing what Bruce referred to as the willow leaf palm, which is actually just a linked 8 animal set.
Those are like linked postures, kind of.
Yeah, they're the Yin Fu postures just linked into a set. So that's the only evidence we have of him actually doing any kind of
That's a little piece left over from that time period, it seems like. So I wanted to end with one last story here, translated from Joseph Crandall's work. With he translated Jingwu Magazine 2006 article. When Yin Fu was teaching martial arts in the palace of the royal family, the chief palace eunuch Kui Rugui studied with him. A little later, the emperor himself also studied martial arts with Yin Fu. As a result, Yin Fu informally became the emperor's teacher. Kui Ringui, the eunuch, studied with Yin Fu for several years. Just before New Year's, Kui went to Yin Fu's house to see his teacher. He held a check and said, "Please, teacher, use this money to buy wine to drink on New Year's Day." He visited for a little while and then left. Yin Fu had never learned to read. He was illiterate. So he took the check and put it aside and did not use it. A short while later, his student, Iron Arm's Li Yong Qing, arrived. They drank some tea and chatted. Yin Fu said that Kui the eunuch had come by and had also presented him with several taels of silver. Saying this, he gave the check to Li Yong Qing to look at. When Li saw it, he laughed and said, "This is 1,000 taels of silver." Yin Fu could not believe it. The two men went to the bank to cash the check. Yin Fu was extremely happy. Right away, he withdrew 10 taels and asked Li Yong Qing to have a meal with him. After this, Yin Fu bought himself a house and lived a prosperous life. So he got paid off by the palace insiders.
Nice.
That's pretty. So he got Li Yong Qing off on the murder charge. Then he showed up and gave him 1,000 taels of, which, I mean, that sounds close. Could that be like $100,000 or something like that? Like,
no idea. Yeah,
that sounds like a fat payoff. I mean, that's a lot of silver. So and Yin Fu just rushes straight to the bank, like, "Let's go!" Right. They go out and start boozing it up. Well, that's a good way to close our knowledge of Li Yong Qing. I mean, I like the Iron Arm part of it, and I hope we can hear more stories about that in the future, because there must be something behind that. That elbow strike maybe is part of it, but
yeah,
I hope more comes out about Li Yong Qing, because it sounds action-packed.
Yeah. All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you later.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening in. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a reminder, like and subscribe. Check out the Instagram. Check out the Patreon. The full Spiraling Energy Body series is out now. There's a couple clips of it on the YouTube page if you want to get a sample of it. Again, thanks for listening. Take care of yourself and be well.